Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this edition of IPI's speaker series. Our distinguished guest today is Lieutenant General Gyllensporre. You have seen the General's illustrious resume in the invitation announcement. He's truly an officer and a scholar. 3 years after his appointment by the Secretary General as Force Commander for the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA for short, the General ended his tour a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. The General, who is from Sweden, led MINUSMA's military contingent of over 30,000 women and men in a highly complex security environment that includes asymmetric threats to MINUSMA's personnel and to the civilians it is tasked to protect. We ask the General to share with us his reflections on his experience with MINUSMA, the General and the challenges the General faced, share with us some of the good practices that he and his team initiated to help address those challenges, and also share with us some lessons learned and some of the achievements he is personally proud of. General Gyllensporre will speak for about 12 to 15 minutes, after which we will engage him in a conversation. I will start off by asking him 1 or 2 questions just to start the ball rolling, with the hope that by then you, our virtual audience, will have posted your own question for the General. As we get close to the end of our allotted time, I may share a couple of takeaways from the conversation before giving the floor back to the General for a final word. And therefore, without further ado, welcome, General, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you first of all for the kind introduction and also for the opportunity to be a part of this program. Indeed, an honor for me. And as I now reflect on the 3 years, it's obviously beyond the scope here to give an accurate account on what has transpired. But I will still want to make a few remarks on the personal note. Obviously, the last 3 years have been marked by 2 coups d'etats, which has elevated the interest, I think, of Mali more internationally. For me personally, 40 soldiers killed, most of them in action, and 304 soldiers wounded in action is something that I will carry with me for a very long time in terms of the legacy of this commitment. And looking at Mali from a security perspective is also something to bear in mind, that the security situation has deteriorated over these 3 years, and that has, in my mind, eclipsed some of the progress that MINUSMA has been made, because it's not the failure of MINUSMA that would explain this negative trend, but other factors. But it has eclipsed MINUSMA in a way that has prevented perhaps the mission to be seen in its important role as a convening power to bring international actors together to make sure that there is coherence amongst those that want to support the Malian people. It is also the fact that MINUSMA has had a stabilizing effect when, in particular, when there have been political crises. MINUSMA and other international presences are present throughout the country in the north, and without this presence, I fear that some spoilers may have seized opportunity when the situation has been a bit difficult in Bamako to seize the initiative in other areas of the country in the north, and they gain some control of remote areas. The other part of the progress and the efforts of MINUSMA is the fact that the mission has evolved during these 3 years, having been a mission solely focused on the implementation of the peace accord in the north, towards doing that, but also addressing the issues, the challenges in the center in support of the government. And that has initiated a change and adaptation of the mission. So with that in mind, I think it's also relevant to bring up some of the progress and the positive indicators that also are present in Mali. And when it comes to the presence, the participation, the involvement of women, in my mind, there is a significant improvement, not just in the numbers, but also the quality, the engagement, and their influence in the peace process, and also at a local and regional level. The youth, same goes for the youth. They have been more vocal, and they stand for something that I think will positively change the country, continue to evolve the country for the benefit of the population. On the security side, we have the reconstituted units and the reconstituted army that has made some progress in the north. And we have also a number of areas that have enjoyed stability and security due to efforts by a wide range of actors. So there are some areas that demonstrate good progress on the ground. At the core of this, being it in the north or in the center, is the key challenge, and that is the bringing back the social contract between the population and the government, to have the population recognizing the government, to put their trust and the loyalty to those who govern, and for the government and its agencies and authorities to provide the services needed for the population. And this is again at the core of what is being done now by the government, but also by MINUSMA and other important actors on the ground. As a force commander, I would say that that role includes not just the traditional executive role, executive in the sense of being a leader of a military organization, in this case 13,000 troops, as you mentioned, from 60 countries. It is about planning, executing, and adopting operations to make sure that security in different regards are implemented, and making sure that there is a coherence within this force. Also making a priority to engage with partners, the other security contributors in the country, so that we are sufficiently coordinated. That's the traditional role, the military role, if you will. The other role, which is very important as a force commander, is the advisory role, being the senior military in a multinational and integrated mission like MINUSMA, providing guidance, providing advice to the SRSG, but also being a part of the senior leadership team to discuss, to draw conclusions on the political developments in the country and also outside Mali, making sure that there is a coherence within the mission as to how the mandate should be interpreted, and how to make sure that the different components would work together with synergy in the different areas, particularly in the center where the situation is quite complex. And the third role is that I've been dealing with is to be a negotiator, because in addition to being a force commander, I've also been the chairman of a technical committee to implement the peace accord, and that committee comprises the signatory parties of the peace accord and also representatives from the international community. So that has been a venue to not only to foster a good relationship between MINUSMA and the parties, but also between the signatory parties, making sure that there is transparency and commitments are being honored and progress is being made with regards to the peace accord. So all three roles have been important. All three roles obviously are interrelated, and the one cannot do without the other as a force commander. And just to conclude my introduction, when it comes to experience and lessons learned from this, is that I want to point out the importance of presence and being out in the different regions throughout the country, meeting with units, military leaders, but also on the civilian side in the mission, and the different movements, making sure that I have best possible situation understanding on the ground. It's also an important leadership aspect to be with units that have challenging missions and where leadership is demanded by junior commanders. So that has been a priority for me, to be out and very present throughout the different regions in the country. The other important lesson that cannot be stressed enough is the understanding of different cultures, and cultures are different within the mission, having 60 nations participating, but also recognizing that there are different cultures within an integrated mission, and the civilian pillars, the police, they have their cultures and traditions. They express themselves somewhat differently, and we need to be very cognizant of all those differences, and to make sure that there is no misunderstandings. And perhaps the most important part is to understand the culture in Mali, the culture amongst the different units, the history, and what actually are the sources of conflict. And it's very much related to other things than the traditional armed groups dynamics that we tend to relate to. And with a good understanding of the culture, it is possible to anticipate the second and third order effects of decisions being made. And that is something that evolves over time. And having been in Mali for 3 years, have taken me at least one step in the right direction. But there is a lot more to be learned to fully understand the dynamics and appreciate the different perspective to fulfill the job in the best possible way. So I think I'll stop there for the benefit of discussions and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this candid and comprehensive series of reflections. what stayed with me listening to you, General, are three important points. The first thing is really what you shared with us, how you carry with a heavy heart, having witnessed so many soldiers fall in the line of duties. That's something that does indeed stay with you. The other two important points is the role, your role as a force commander. We don't usually associate the role of being part of the implementation of the peace agreement as a negotiator. We understand the first two, the executive and the advisory, but it's rare that the force commander has the opportunity to contribute to the implementation of a peace agreement. So thank you for bringing that to. I think the last point that I really took note of, which is the understanding of culture. And the necessity to listen in order to understand the culture within the mission, within the troops that come from different countries, but also understanding the culture of the Malian in the Malian environment in which you operate. This is really very, very important. I am so happy that you underscored it. I would like to pick up on one aspect that you, maybe one or two aspects. Speaking of the heavy toll that of death among soldiers, particularly that MINUSMA sustained throughout its operation since 2013. And you have alluded to that under where you were there, 40 soldiers died and over 300 were injured. Why do you think the mission is so frequently targeted? What do you think are some of the reasons for this heavy toll, General?
Well, thank you for that question. I think there are a number of factors that play in here. Obviously, there are a number of armed illegal groups that operate in the country, and MINUSMA and the peacekeepers become a target because we are trying to reestablish stability at village level, and in many cases they aspire to control the villages. They take out taxes and they provide some services, so they want to control some of the areas. And when we come in, we become a competition for them, and that's why one of the reasons why we are targeted. The other reason is that we limit or hamper their freedom of movement, and these groups are more often than not involved in illegal trafficking of different natures. And when we patrol areas, we at least provide obstacles, and we become a problem for these groups. So I think that is another factor. And there may also be some symbolic value in the rivalry between different groups to demonstrate their assertiveness, to be able to attack and inflict damage on the international presence in the UN. So there is potentially also that factor that plays in.
Thank you very, very much, General. This is very helpful to know, and this is the cost of your presence, as you have mentioned. Maybe linked to that, there is a doctrinal issue that I wish to discuss with you. As we all know, MINUSMA is expected to carry out this mandate in a robust and proactive manner. And that sometimes means be ready to use the force. And this is a little bit in dissonance with the traditional principle of peacekeeping, which every resolution reminds us of, namely, you have to carry your job with the consent of the parties, maintain impartiality, and the non-use of force except in self-defense and defense of the mandate. How can you stick to such a traditional peacekeeping doctrine in areas of deployment, particularly in the center where there's no peace to keep, and the troops are under constant threat, as you just shared with us? How do you reconcile the reality on the ground with this high, lofty doctrinal principle of peacekeeping?
Thank you. This is a very relevant and important question that we have discussed in MINUSMA frequently. And as you said, these principles are indeed guiding principles for any peacekeeping mission. And it is in the North, in some ways straightforward, but as you alluded to, there is a peace accord. There are recognized parties to the peace accord, and there are formats for de-escalation and so on and so forth. So that works. But then again, it's not the recognized actors that have signed up to the peace accord that inflicts damage, that attacks civilians or MINUSMA. It's the spoilers, the illegal armed groups, and they are sort of beyond the legal framework of the peace accord. So it is not in that sense particularly helpful to talk about impartiality towards those that would pose an immediate threat to peacekeepers. And the other part in the center, as you said, there is no peace process. There are no recognized parties except for obviously for the government, and that makes MINUSMA more of a supporting effort to the government and is its reestablishment in the center. And at the same time, there is nothing there that would suggest that we could be seeking consent from the parties. So we have to fall back on the rules of engagement. So in addition to the mandate, there are specific rules of engagement that have been delegated to me as a force commander, and those are clear in terms of the mandate, when we can use force, under which scenarios, and the criteria for using force up to lethal force, both for obviously for the protection of MINUSMA personnel, but also for ensuring the implementation of the mandate. So the rules of engagement provides clarity. Now, having said that, there are misconceptions and there are different interpretations on what we should do and what could not be done from a peacekeeping perspective. And having these principles in place obviously leaves some room for interpretation, and this is exactly the intention. The Security Council has recognized these peacekeeping principles, but also pointed out that they are contextually dependent. So depending on the country and the situation, they need to be applied with the judgment that comes with the mission leadership. And the conversation and the common understanding within the mission becomes very important to make sure that we have both a coherent but an effective posture in these situations. And I also want to make a comment from a troop contributing country perspective, because contingents come in to the mission with different preconceptions on the peacekeeping part, what it is. And peacekeeping is probably very different in Mali compared to some other peacekeeping missions. And the understanding and the application at the unit level becomes a critical part. They need to understand this. And it's also something that I put a lot of effort in the leadership to make sure that they understand what is expected from them, the requirements, but also the degree of flexibility that they have at unit level to ensure the implementation of the mandate.
Thank you very much. I can see the leadership dimension in what you have just shared with us, how to ensure there is a shared and practical understanding of how to navigate a traditional peacekeeping mindset and a robust mindset. It's quite a leadership challenge, I am sure. Before I follow up with another question, there is one question from one of a participant who admires your communication style and was wondering whether you have received prior to the deployment or during any strategic communication guidance that enables you to perform so well.
Not specifically, and this is an important aspect of the mission. And in a mission that harbors different interpretations from the international community's perspective, there have been many views on what MINUSMA should be doing, that MINUSMA should be more robust, and there is this discussion on counterterrorism and so on. And this is easily something that could confuse the personnel. So it is very important to have the strategic communications within the mission and within the force, and to have a language and a narrative that is straightforward. And for instance, for the force, the key unifying point for the force, the raison d'être for the force, as we have defined it, is to be population-centric and to focus on the population and advancing protection, advancing partnering with our partnering forces, but also advancing the posture, changing the way we do our operations, and changing the force as a whole. And the adaptation of the force is one of those really important endeavors that we have embarked on, that requires attention for a long time and with long-term objectives. And these, of course, are easily challenged by the immediate concerns that you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis, attacks against personnel and so on. But the longer-term focus to change the composition, to change the culture and the cohesion in the force, it has also to be a part of the efforts at all the leadership levels, despite all the things that are going on the ground.
Thank you. Very helpful answer. One more question from our audience, if I might share it with you, General. Everyone obviously is looking at other stabilization efforts that have not necessarily succeeded. Afghanistan is mentioned. And there are those who have been working with international presences, supporters, interpreters, and they are wondering what will be their fate when the mission departs. So the person is asking, is there, next to military intervention, any additional programs for peace education in civil society, something that will remain and endure after the departure?
Well, there are a number of Malian efforts, and there are also a number of NGOs that are engaged in dialogues with the parties. And I think the whole process of reconciliation is something that will bring the population to this desired end state, if you will, to have the conflict, the tension in the past, in the history. And the efforts have to be carried out by the Malians. They should be at the forefront. They should really be the ones that bring this to the different stakeholders. And MINUSMA and others, yes, we can and should play a role in it, but it is their reconciliation, and they are the ones that can and will do it in the best possible way.
Indeed, they should be in the lead. While waiting, there are a couple of other questions. Let me just follow up, which I'll share with you in a minute, but let me just follow up on something that drew my attention in your introductory remark, particularly about the number and quality and influence of women peacekeepers within the contingent. Can you tell us a little bit more? What does this mean for the implementation of MINUSMA's mandate to have women peacekeepers? Could you give us some good example that leverage the value added women soldiers bring to the mission?
Well, yes, I have a few points here. And in the infantry battalions, there are now supposed to be engagement teams, female engagement teams, and engagement teams that will be a part of operations. And for instance, when a patrol engages in a village, this team would engage with women, because sadly, in many cases, when you enter a village, you will meet with the village leadership, the key stakeholders, and rarely are women represented. And the two-pronged approach to do that, but also at the same time engage with women it's been successful. I've been a part of a number of these events and seen also how much of very useful and complementary information that has been obtained through these teams. And it's a completely different dynamic in these conversations than the ones with the local leadership, the established leadership. So this will bring a much fuller understanding on the complexities and the perception of security challenges that will enable us to plan and operations to support the community for the future. The other aspect is female peacekeepers in leadership roles and in key roles in the mission. We've had aviators, helicopter pilots, and commanders at different levels. And these female officers and also soldiers, they play a very important role as role models for others, because obviously amongst these 60 nations being present, there are different levels of maturity and different levels of integration of female soldiers and officers in their national armies. And they are inspiring others and coming together and seeing that indeed female officers have a role, and they will do things in a very professional role. And the third point I want to make is the fact that female officers, they are officers first and foremost. So they should be recognized for their professionalism. And then you can argue then they're also females, so they have that. But being for instance, a full colonel in a mission headquarters or a force headquarters is something that is a result of a long-standing and successful career in any army, regardless of gender, and they come in that capacity of being very proficient in an area. And I say this, but because sometimes it becomes a sort of a numbers game to recognize that there are females and just elevating the numbers, but they are there in their own capacity because they're good soldiers, they're good officers also. So I want to bring that up as well.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy for you. I'm happy to hear you emphasizing that we're not talking about numbers of female within peacekeeping. We're talking about the quality and the value and the ranks of these female soldiers within the military contingent. One more question from our audience. The question is, will your experiences and lessons learned or identified affect the training concept for the Viking exercise, which is, it's a platform for multinational civil and military education?
Well, I hope so. I wouldn't know. I've been engaging with a number of different actors in Sweden now to share some of my experience, but the most detailed account of my experiences and observations had been submitted to the UN headquarters in New York, and as a part of the end of assignment report. And I'm positively overwhelmed with the enthusiasm to discuss these things with me. And so, having said that, I'm very confident that they are considering the observations and trying to make use of them to the extent possible at the UN headquarters. And I think that the learning organization that we so often talk about, I've seen in practice in New York, and I also have follow-up meetings after my departure from Mali, and it is something that really is inspiring to see that there is an eagerness to benefit of the observations and recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish to follow up on one aspect that you just barely touched upon, but I'd like to probe a little bit deeper. That one of your roles that you have mentioned certainly within the executive aspect of your role is to coordinate with other security presence with which you share the operational environment. These other multinational military forces and presences have counter terrorism and counterinsurgency in their mandates, and you are often cooperating with them or working alongside. What leadership challenges does this or has this operational environment presented for you as a force commander, and what lessons learned and leadership best practices can you share?
Indeed, the security on the ground necessitates a close cooperation between those that are committed to improve the security. And in the case of MINUSMA or Mali, this the Security Council has mandated MINUSMA to coordinate with the others. So again, coming back to what I said at the beginning, MINUSMA has the convening power to bring the security actors together. So I had that authority as the force commander, and my fellow police commissioner is doing the same thing on the police side. So we convened regularly to discuss on the senior level the priorities, the operations, and also the geographical aspects of where to deploy forces. And this was also follow up at working level. So there is a structure to make sure that there is connectivity, coordination, but also deconfliction, because as you alluded to, there are areas that we need to separate our activities with those that are conducting counter terrorist operations, and making sure that those are held in separate areas and not being associated with each other. There is a legal framework for this, and that provides clear guidance, but there are also political aspects on this and how to do things like this. So the SRSG is often involved in some of these principal matters that relates to the coordination. My experience is that we've done quite a lot in terms of coordinating and making sure that there is coherence and synergy, even though that we are not present at the same locations at the same time, but there is still an indirect synergy between the different areas, because what MINUSMA is doing in terms of protection of civilians on the military side as well on the civilian side is one measure to improve the security, and the counter-terrorist part is another effort, but they should not be seen in isolation to each other. And in particular for the population, they see this, they don't see the distinction here. The population, they regard terrorists as the #1 threat, and that they should be protected from the terrorists. So for them, it's the same problem set. And sometimes this leads to confusion and a misunderstanding on the role and the contribution of MINUSMA, because if MINUSMA is understood as a mission that is not involved in counterterrorism, which is legally the way it has been delineated, then some people infer that we are not contributing to security, but this is obviously not accurate in my mind. And the mandate that MINUSMA has in terms of using force is to protect the civilians, and the mandate does not make any distinction with regards to who the perpetrators are. So if the population is threatened, then MINUSMA, the peacekeepers, have some certain authorities, but also some obligations to protect the civilians, regardless who the attackers are. And this is sometimes lost in translation when it comes to the perception of MINUSMA.
Thank you, General. Just to quick follow-up, for the spoilers and the armed groups who may not necessarily be well-versed in the internal mechanics of convening and coordination, they perceive you as part of the enemy. And some people say that visible or subtle coordination make them believe that you are a target, you are not impartial anymore. And could this be perhaps one reason that account for the high number of casualty and for the targeting by spoilers of MINUSMA soldiers?
Well, this is just me having an opinion. I think that this argument may be used, but for some of these actors, at the end of the day, I would think that most of them would know what the United Nations stands for, the core values, and the focus on advancing human dignity across borders. So I think that this is known, but they still use these arguments and to their advantage, even though that they may have knowledge of the UN and peacekeeping as a tool for the United Nations to advance human dignity.
Thank you. I would like to, while waiting for more questions, to perhaps talk about another aspect of MINUSMA's mandate, to which you and the force are mandated to contribute to, while being people-centered, and you are also expected to support the state presence, state authority, and extension of state services in areas where the state is absent or not a referent at all. How do you manage that equation, particularly in the absence of services, in the absence of the presence of the state?
There are different conditions and circumstances in different parts of the country, but in general, what we want to do is to set conditions for the Malian security and defense forces to establish themselves or re-establish themselves in an area, so that they can provide the security, safeguard the population, and subsequently allow for civilian authorities, civilian services to come back, to return to these villages. This is a long process, and it requires a lot of determination to make sure that these measures are set. The DDR process that has been ongoing now for 3 years is a very important vehicle in re-establishing presence in particular the northern part of the country, with the legitimate government-controlled forces and security providers, so that others can join in. So we should be in a supporting role for the Malian government to allow this to happen. And the same when it comes to the center, it's a bit different there, because the DDR process is related to the peace accord, and it applies to the north. And now, in the most recent mandate to MINUSMA, has been given more flexibility to support the Malian security establishment and redeployment to the center, to make sure that this the same could apply in the center, namely to have them in more present in the area, and then set conditions for the civilians. A key point is, of course, the lack of units. It's the numbers when it comes to police, gendarmerie, military from the Malian side, but also that they get the sufficient equipment and training before being deployed in quite a challenging environment, and we try to assist in all aspects of having them in location and set up for success in the different regions.
Thank you. I mean, so it's creating an enabling environment for them to gradually establish themselves, not only in terms of the military presence, but also administratively. Follow-up, another question, if I may, General. In addition to being known as the world's most dangerous peacekeeping mission, as we discussed, given the heavy toll it has on soldiers. MINUSMA is also known for using technology, information technology, from drones for surveillance, for information gathering, and so on and so forth. What can you tell us about the use of information technology as a force multiplier? You, who is not unfamiliar, given I was rereading your CV this morning, you know a little bit about the use of technology.
I think we've been hugely fortunate to have an improvement of the support by various technical systems, and I would in particular like to mention camp security, because the camps, they have been repeatedly attacked. They are still being attacked, but the major difference now compared to a few years ago is that there are very seldom attacks where the perpetrators trying to breach the camp, and simply because the threshold has been raised. The threshold with sensors, detectors, that would make this a very dangerous endeavor for the attackers. So we have reduced the scale of complex attacks against the camps with technology. I'm quite convinced on that, and as a consequence, limited the number of casualties in the camps. And there are few instances now where we have had casualties due to attacks against camps. So with some few exceptions, camps are attacked now with indirect fires, and we have sensors that would alarm and warn those that are in the camp, and we have shelters and so on. So we have done quite a lot in that regard. Now, the other aspect and the other vulnerability that the mission has is convoys. And convoys, the common denominator is, of course, that we are predictable. The camps are where they are, and they're not going anywhere. And the convoys, they are getting somewhere, but slowly. And it's a huge tail with 50 trucks or so, and with escorts. So they're also very predictable. And when it comes to convoys, the main threat is the IED and IED attacks. And we have been less successful in mitigating that threat. And there are a number of measures that have been taken, but there is more to be done in this area. So the attention is and should be from not just from MINUSMA, but also I know from the UN headquarters. They're very focused on assisting MINUSMA in enabling its capacity to deal with the IED threat with technology, but also when it comes to training and making sure that the equipment is fit for purpose as the units deploy. So this is where the attention is going now, and where the potential for improvements lie. And when it comes to the vulnerability of soldiers and the threat environment, it is sometimes believed that security is when you are in the camp. but the statistics are clear. When you're doing operations, when peacekeepers are in operations, they are seldom attacked. It's more the case when they operate within the base or as a part of a convoy. So a proactive posture by the peacekeepers is also not only useful to advance the mandate, it is also helpful for force protection.
Thank you. I wish to speak about another environment that the resolution talks about, and that's the environment linked to climate and linked to, and there is a specific mention of that in the resolution. MINUSMA is a massive presence. As you've mentioned, there are convoys, fuel, use of roads, and therefore being a good custodian of that environment is one of the missions, perhaps not the first or second priority, but it's a collateral priority. How has your force, how have you contributed to that, to the preservation of the environment during the operational part of the mission?
Well, we obviously the expertise and the authority also, I should say, on environmental aspects lies on the civilian side of the mission, and we've been supported, and we've also organized environmental officers in the different regions as to make sure that the UN policies and guidelines are implemented and to limit the footprint, environmental footprint. And as in other areas, it's so important that the UN is leading the way in terms of being a role model. So we have to apply to the highest standards in how when it comes to recycling and limit energy consumption and so on. And so there are measures in place, and it is also monitored in the mission, and this is something that the mission leadership revisits based on the statistics. So we track how we are progressing on different benchmarks, and also together with the logistical side of the mission, there are reviews on not just on convoys, but how to sustain the mission, the modes of transportation, but also the routes, so that we limit the sustain the routes and the energy consumption needed to provide the goods to the different camps. It's a force protection issue, but it's also an environmental issue, and these two aspects need to be a part of the same equation.
Thank you very much. We are coming close to our allotted time, General. Just one, I'm going to put you on the spot and share with me one particular achievement you're proud of as a force commander.
The redeployment of the reconstituted Malian units, to me, it symbolizes so much of the future, the hope, the aspirations, the reconciliation of the Malian people coming together. Those that fought together against each other a few years ago, they are standing shoulder by shoulder, working together for the benefit of the Malian people in the north. And this is, to me, what makes sense, and it's such a tangible step of progress that gives me a lot of hope for the future. We've taken one step, or the Malians have taken one step with our assistance, and I'm confident they will continue on this pursuit for the benefit of the next generation Malians.
Thank you. One last question before we close. One participant is asking that given the allegation regarding blue helmet sexual behavior towards the population, do you really think that MINUSMA is still having the trust of the population? This particular participant would like to hear your views.
One violation of an abuse is one too many, and we should never surrender the determination to respond in all possible ways to these criminal acts and also prevent them. But at the same time, I'm quite confident that the image of MINUSMA when it comes to the interaction with the population is a positive one, and that the reputation of peacekeepers is a reputation that is underpinned by dedication and commitment for their cause.
Thank you. You mentioned, and this is my final question, that you have witnessed during your tenure 40 soldiers that have died in the line of duty. I'm sure you have attended many ceremonies where you see the caskets draped with the UN flag of people that were killed or died. This is something that you carry with you. How are you feeling that? How are you going to be coping with that sentiments and the impact is having on you as a human being now that you have left the mission?
It's difficult to put words on it, and out of this 40, I've been convening ceremonies for 38 of them, and in a number of cases, I've also followed the remains to their home country. I talked to the families and to their friends, and attended the national ceremonies. And as much as this is a difficult and very emotional situation for everyone, it is also a good way to bring it's not closure, but at least another step in the mourning process. And I think it's important for the UN, and in this case for MINUSMA, to bring a face and to this mourning process and the difficult situation that these families are put in. And I have also benefited in my processing of having talked to them and having the opportunity to explain and put these very tragic situations into context and bring up what they have done and what they are part of, and which obviously transcends any individual. So the dialogue and the ceremonies are very important. How this will affect me in the long run, it remains to be seen, but it's certainly something that I cannot separate myself from. This will be an anchor in my legacy, and also I think something for me to process for a long time as a human being, not as a force commander, but as a human being.
Indeed, thank you for that candid response. It stays with you, and you have to manage it the best you can long after you left the theater of operation. I'm going to bring this to a close, General, but I wish to highlight one takeaway that I will wish to share with the audience and with you, and then give you a final closing remark. For me, it's all about leadership. And it's the ship in leadership that I feel you have demonstrated, both within the mission, and particularly when you have talked about developing a shared understanding and a shared narrative of how we are going to conduct our operation, given the various doctrinal challenges, but also in terms of the role that you have played in helping and in supporting the implementation of the peace agreement. But the aspect of leadership that really stayed with me is understanding the culture. It's not often something that we hear. Understanding the culture within the mission, given that you are heading a military component come from 60 nations, but also the culture of the environment in which you operate, the Malian culture. In order to be people-centered, you need to understand the culture, so as not to do any harm, trying to, in good faith, trying to support. I think the last element is the human element. Leadership is about relating to the other human, and I think from the answers that you have shared with us and the reflection that you have shared with us, really your reflections wonderfully summarize that human aspect of leadership beyond the command and control and the mechanism and the ranks, and your recognition, finally, your recognition of the importance of women soldiers in the peacekeeping mission, and particularly MINUSMA, not because they are women, but because they are leaders and officers. And you have created the environment for that to be seen and felt. So many, many thanks to you, General. Final word before we bring it to an end?
Thank you very much. And just to say that it should be a huge privilege for anybody to serve in peacekeeping, and the trust that has been put on me in this case by the TCCs, by the UN leadership, is something also that I will bear with me. And I cannot think of any more important and valuable role and task for a military officer to support and advance human dignity. It goes far beyond protecting a national border, far beyond the national interest, but to serve at the pleasure of humanity. So I'm very honored to have been a part of the United Nations and provided my contribution to this enormous effort that the United Nations is undertaking. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about this mission also.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I will encourage everyone who is going to be a pen holder of the subsequent mandate for MINUSMA to put human dignity as part of the overall objective of the mandate, restoring and cultivating a human dignity. Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. Have a good day. Thank you so much.